Hi, this is Charles Feldman. Welcome to another edition of SOS America. And for those of you who may be watching or listening for the very first time, what is this podcast about? Well, it's about what is happening at this particular time here in the United States. And it's designed for people who live here, but also for people who may be watching or listening overseas who are trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. And there's a lot. There's a lot politically, there's a lot economically, and there's certainly a lot socially as well. One of the biggest topics that has been occupying the news media here in the US for the past few weeks really has been the situation between the situation that's really a downplay of it, isn't it? The war between Russia and Ukraine, the aggression actually that Russia launched on Ukraine, and how this situation or this war may be eventually resolved if it's going to be resolved. And as I'm sure all of you folks know, there's been a lot going on at the political level involving President Donald Trump here, other Western world leaders, and certainly Vladimir Putin in Russia and President Zelensky in Ukraine. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to take you actually inside Ukraine. And with us now is Phil Ittner, who is a very long time journalist who is in Kyiv right now in Ukraine. Phil has been in Ukraine, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil. I think you've been there pretty much since the war started. I know you've been in and out, but we've talked many times in the past few years. And by the way, when I say that, I find that interesting because I remember talking with you at the beginning of the war, and I don't think most people thought it would go on for years, but it has. So, Phil, welcome to SOS America. Appreciate your time.
Good to be here, Charles.
Uh, for people who may not be familiar with you, and you've had a long body of work, but just a brief synopsis of your background, Phil.
Well, I was a broadcast journalist for several decades, nearly 3 decades, for some of the major broadcast networks in the English-speaking world. I was a deputy bureau chief in Baghdad for CBS News. I was a London-based producer and radio reporter for them for many, many years throughout Iraq, Afghanistan, and everywhere in between. I was a radio reporter in Moscow in the late 90s, which is when I started covering the former Soviet Union. I saw the end of the Yeltsin era and the rise of Vladimir Putin. And then, of course, the war on terror came along, and while I tried to keep going to Russia as much as possible, then nobody was really interested in that story. In 2008, although I was able to go, did cover the war in Georgia, for example. I worked for Fox News, CNN, NBC, ABC, 60 Minutes, Voice of America. I was a bit of a gun for hire in many ways. I worked, Sky News in the UK. And I was here in Kiev. You're right, I've been coming to Kiev for 25 years. My first visit here was in 2000 with the visit of Pope John Paul II. And then subsequently was on Maidan Square in 2014 when there was the revolution of what they refer to here as the revolution of dignity, which is when they ousted the pro-Moscow leadership here, which had kind of betrayed their promises of trying to make a trade agreement with Europe. That started a whole thing, and ever since then, there's been direct conflict between Moscow and Kiev. And while I was on Maidan Square during that period of time, they said, I made promises to some people that were there that when the Russians would come back, and that's how they put it to me, not if, but when the Russians come back to seize their colony of Ukraine, they made me promise that I would come back and not let it happen in the shadows. And so in 2022, when the full scale invasion did occur, I felt obligated to uphold my promises, and I came back here. And yeah, I have been here for the last 3.5 years, and on my own dime, just reporting as I can in this new kind of podcasting, self-starting. You can have your own, channel and put out your own content on Substack and what have you. And so that's what I've been doing. And I was vlogging for a while, moving around the country, going to the front lines. But then I decided that what I would do instead is set up a production studio in Kyiv, and that we would have our own podcasting facility with high-end bikes, high-end cameras, and all that kind of stuff. And so we started a program about a year and change ago called On the Edge, and we put it out on, it has its own channel, but my channel already had a sizable audience, so we kind of rely on, and it's just simply on YouTube under my name, Phil Ittner, and it's called On the Edge. And we talk to people, we talk to Ukrainians, obviously. The priority is platforming Ukrainian voices, but we also talk to, people who have, particularly interesting insight or experience in the country, whether they're journalists or soldiers or whatever. And that's what we do. So that's why I'm here, and we do it we put out a show every Sunday. It lasts about an hour, and they'll give or take. Last week we had a special edition to discuss Vladimir Putin's visit to Alaska, and that was a rather long episode. That's 2.5 hours long, cut up into the chapters or the interviews, so you can skip around. But normally it lasts about an hour, and we put it out every Sunday.
All right, very good. I realize, I think with you, Phil, it's probably in some ways easier to say, where have you not worked?
That's the truth. That's the truth. Well, yeah.
No, good for you. The very first time, I'm searching my memory here, but I'm pretty sure the very first time you and I talked at the very beginnings of this war back in 2022, right? I seem to recall when I asked the question, well, what is the mood like among Ukrainians? How are they taking this invasion from Russia? And I'm pretty sure that your answer then was that they were, confident that they would have backing from the West. Of course, at the time, there was a different administration in Washington. They were confident that they would have backing of Western Europe, and they were confident that they would win. I'm pretty sure that was, and you're shaking your head. Yes, my recollection of this is pretty accurate. All right, so here we are in 2025. The Russians are as you know better than I do, they control what, about a fifth of the country? Is that right?
About 19-20% of the country is occupied by the Russians. Yeah.
Okay. There's a president in the United States, Donald Trump, who seems to have an affinity to not only Vladimir Putin, but to Putin's point of view. So I'm wondering now, when you interact with Ukrainians, how has that mood shifted from 2022, if it has?
Well, they've been frustrated by the West's support in some ways. In other ways, they're grateful for whatever they can get. And they are aware that, in particular, the Europeans are very supportive of them because, of course, they're right on they're basically holding the wall, holding the line from, next it's Poland sort of thing.
Mhm.
And it's also important to recognize that the Europeans are doing that because they're aware that it's not just that the Russians would be able to roll tanks down the Champs-Élysées in Paris, or pull up their ships in Portsmouth in the UK. But what would happen is that they would be poised on the edge of Europe, and by the sheer threat, they would be able to influence markets, capitals, elections, things like that. So
Mhm.
we're not just looking at military advancement. Should Ukraine fall? I don't think Ukraine is going to fall. And when you ask me about the mood of the people and the mentality of the Ukrainian people, they are exhausted. This is absolutely draining. Everybody is losing people. Everybody goes down into the shelters and lives under constant fear in the middle of the night that, am I going to wake up tomorrow morning, sort of thing. And that's the emotional toll that's taking, not just the physical toll, but that's
Mhm.
very real too. But the emotional toll, everybody's exhausted. Everybody's exhausted. But they know that occupation by Moscow would be a worse circumstance. I mean, it really is kind of I'm going to, it's better to die standing on your feet than live on your knees. And that's a very prevalent attitude here. There is no one attitude, by the way, as well.
Mhm.
And this is the thing about the Ukrainians. They will bicker amongst themselves. If they don't have an external enemy, they will bicker amongst themselves. So there's a variety of opinion about a lot of different things about, what should be done to just simply end the war, stop the fighting, stop the killing, or do they still hold out hope that they will be able to regain territory that's been lost? There's a whole gamut of of mentality about those kind of questions. But the one thing that absolutely has not changed is that they will not be colonized by Moscow again. It will not happen. They are determined for it not to happen. Even if we are talking, if the Ukrainian armed forces would just suddenly collapse, which they are nowhere near doing, there would be a guerrilla war. There would be an insurgency. There would be partisan warfare. Russia would have to send in so many troops to try and pacify and control Ukraine. And they just simply don't have the manpower. And so there is a general attitude here in Ukraine that the Russians cannot win. They can't achieve their strategic goals. We may lose more territory, but it won't change the ultimate outcome of this war, and that is that this will be, this is a disaster and will be a disaster for the Kremlin and for Russian armed forces. It's just they're still determined to put up
But
a
all right,
voracious defense.
yeah, but as much as they may like to say and think that the Russians won't win, and I suppose that to some degree it depends on how one defines win, right? I mean, what is the definition of win? And there may be a definition, I suspect, in Ukraine than there is in Moscow, but to some degree. If an eventual end to this war results in Russia maintaining control or gaining control, really, of what is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the area that they now control or trying to have full control over, the eastern part, is really the industrial heartland, is it not, of Ukraine?
It's yes, not exclusively, but primarily yes. That's where all the factories are, the mines are. That's where some of the kind of heavier um, uh, resources, like steel and or coal, steel, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's all out in the east. Um,
Right, but here's my point.
or it was before Russia blew the
Right.
hell out of
So
it.
so if this ends with if this war ends with Russia maintaining control of that area, and of course they have control over Crimea, and if the agreement, whenever there is an agreement, includes that Ukraine no longer seek membership in NATO, and we can get into a little bit later what sort of other arrangements perhaps could be made short of a NATO security blanket. But if they're also not allowed to do that, and if they're not allowed to in other ways exercise what a sovereign state would be able to exercise, then how is it that Russia then doesn't win?
Well, okay, so Russia's two primary strategic goals in this war are unattainable to them. They don't have the means to do it. They need to change the government in Kiev to one that is more pro Moscow, that is a friendly government. That is not going to happen. And secondly, and perhaps equally, if not even more importantly, the Russians need to take Odessa, because so much of this war is about dominion of the Black Sea. And Russia cannot have dominion of the Black Sea as long as Odessa is still controlled by the Ukrainians. Sevastopol will never be safe. And the Black Sea fleet that is based in Sevastopol will never be safe as long as Odessa is still in Ukrainian hands. That is why they have moved the entire Black Sea to the eastern, their Black Sea fleet to the eastern shore of the Black Sea. This is so much of this war is about Russia's one of Russia's primary geopolitical goals that has existed for centuries, going all the way back to Peter the Great, is their desire for a warm water port. And Sevastopol is the closest thing that they have to a warm water port that's truly functional for them. The Baltic is now a NATO sea with the ascension of Finland and Norway into NATO. So now their Baltic fleet, which is based in St. Petersburg, is locked in. Their Arctic fleet, they have a total of 4 fleets, the Russians. They have the Baltic, they have the Black Sea, they have the Pacific fleet located out in Vladivostok, which is very, very difficult to support because the lines, the transportation lines, for many months of the year, when you go through Siberia, it's to support Vladivostok from the land is very, very expensive and problematic for them. And then finally, they have their Arctic fleet based in Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. Problem with that is that for certain months of the year, it never completely closes, but it does freeze into a very, very narrow lane to get in and out of their home port in Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. So in one fell swoop, they've lost 2 of their major fleets, the Baltic being in the NATO lake and the Black Sea fleet. So these are essential things for Vladimir Putin to get. And that is why they have fixated on the what's called the land bridge that runs through Donbass, Luhansk, and a bit of an oblast called Kherson. And they have that now. They do have that. But the problem is, what strategic good is even the land bridge if your Black Sea, the home port of the Black Sea Fleet, is no longer viable because it's under threat from Odessa? So all of that having been said, even if they do gain control of some of these industrial centers and some of these natural resources, there's salt, major salt deposits out there. There's all sorts of natural resources that are, it's mostly mining and as we mentioned, industrial stuff and smelting and all those kind of ironworks kind of stuff. There's a Ukrainian city called Kharkiv that also has these kind of assets. It is highly unlikely that the Russians will be able to take Kharkiv. It's a city built for 2 million people. They would make it into an absolute, it would be Stalingrad. It would deplete Russian forces significantly. So the best that the Kremlin can hope to get right now is control of Donetsk, Luhansk, and this land bridge down to Sevastopol, or to kind of claim they've taken the entire Donbass. And then there's the other option. What could be spun by Putin into a win is if he can get his forces onto the left bank of the Dnieper River, which kind of cuts the country almost in half. Not quite. It's about three. It would, if that 3/5 of the country would still be Ukraine. But the problem that would then lead to is that everybody would stop. Russia would rearm itself. It would sit on the other side of the river and just wait for a period of time until they can launch again, unless very real security guarantees are given to Ukraine. Ukraine is skeptical of that because, again, they have seen promises that have been made to them betrayed. The 1994 Budapest agreement, in which they gave up their nuclear weapons at the behest of the United States, the UK, and also Russia was a signatory to it as well, recognizing and securing the borders that existed in '94. Well, that's been broken.
By the way, that just to backtrack a bit, that agreement to give up the nuclear weapons, I'm trying to recall, was that under Obama?
No, that was under Clinton.
Under Clinton?
Yeah, that was Clinton and Yeltsin and, was it John Major representing the UK? I forget. And then I'm forgetting also who the Ukrainian leader was at the time. It might have been Kuchma. Regardless, it was primarily a Clinton-led initiative because, of course, after the fall of the Soviet Union, loose nukes were very much there were a huge concern. So they said, if you give up, we will, your nuclear arsenal, which just happens to be on your territory, even though you need the launch codes from Moscow, that we will guarantee your borders. And well, that hasn't happened. So Ukrainians do feel a little bit betrayed by that. And once birthed, twice shy. So they would need very serious security concerns. But again, I don't even think, unless something's, and I've covered over a dozen wars, I do not think that the Russians have the capacity to really push into these river embankment cities. There are a whole bunch of cities that run up and down the river. And it appears as though Russia's aims are either on a city called Zaporizhia, which is kind of halfway down the river, or Kherson, which is down at the southern tip. of the river and basically leads into the Black Sea. Um, the Russians are able to fire into Kherson. They can use medium range drones and things like that. Kherson is getting pelted, absolutely pelted. There's a thing called the human safari that's happening in Kherson, where Russian drone operators literally chase civilians down city streets, and will follow them down corners and into buildings and things like that. These drone operators.
What's the situation like where you are in Kyiv?
Where I am in Kyiv is actually it has gone through good times and bad times. Currently, touch wood, we're in a relatively good period of time because we have air defense here. Obviously, much of the Ukrainian armed forces air defense capabilities are located here in the capital. So we still get attacks. We still get drone and hypersonic missiles and all sorts of longer range weapons coming in here in the middle of the night. They tend to actually like to get us in the really wee hours in the morning, so that you get your sleep is disrupted and everybody kind of walks around like a zombie with raccoon eyes. Nobody's sleeping.
I was going to ask you, I mean, I know you've covered many wars, but you've been, as we said at the outset, you've been in and out, I think mostly in Ukraine since the war began.
Mostly in.
Mostly in.
To leave.
But
it's a 2 or 3 day process to get out.
But how has it impacted you?
Well, I mean, I was actually in the process of kind of semi-retiring, of changing my career. I've been a war correspondent for 30 years, and I've had enough. I've seen enough dead bodies and children with 1,000-yard stares and all the horrors and the trauma of war. And I said, I think it was during COVID, like so many of us who took that period of time and reflected on their lives and said, do I want to spend the rest of my days on this planet doing X, Y, or Z? And upon reflection, no, I'd rather do something different. Well, that kind of is what happened to me. So I was going to start doing, after decades of getting shot at, I was going to change my direction and start doing things like documentaries about the Pacific Coast Highway, or the Great Lakes or something like that.
By the way, you can get shot at it on the Pacific Coast Highway. So
you can't get shot at on the Pacific Coast Highway. This is your hunting season. You can get shot at in Michigan. So, but it was I'd had enough. I'd had a belly full of war, and I was ready to change my life. And this happened. And I remembered the promises I made while I was on Maidan. And in addition to that, and this is something that I don't think we have done enough explaining to our Western English-speaking populations. This is probably, unless God forbid, we turn into a world war and you take on China or something like that. This is probably one of the most important wars that I will ever cover in my life.
why?
Because it will change the landscape of Europe. One way or other, Europe is going to have a very different future no matter what happens in Ukraine. They are either going to have a far less dangerous threat from Moscow, and also have a brand new member of the European community that, if it can get its act together, and that's a big if, will be a juggernaut, an absolute juggernaut economically. this is the breadbasket of not only Europe, but huge swaths of the planet are fed from Ukraine. Ukraine has a very special soil that is really receptive to growing crops. So that is why you see that the Ukrainian flag is the yellow of the sunflower fields, which you can turn into sunflower oil, and then the blue sky above it. That's what the Ukrainian flag symbolizes. It's because, not to go too deeply into it, but it's because when the kind of after the ice age, as the waters receded, it left this incredibly rich soil. So this place feeds people all over the world. The Horn of Africa, if that's why when the war began, there was such a concern about there being famines because the Black Sea trade routes, the shipping lanes, were getting mined, and so there was this grave fear that, in particular, the Horn of Africa and the entire subcontinent, the Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, they get huge amounts of food from Ukraine, not to mention the food that goes into Europe. So,
you're outlining now a very positive, potentially positive outcome, but I suspect that you were implying that there is the other side of the coin, which might not be as positive.
yeah, the other side of the coin is, of course, that that Ukraine's civil society breaks, that that there is indeed put in a stooge government for Moscow in Kyiv. That there would be, again, as I say, an insurgency war, a guerrilla war, maybe a civil war between Ukrainians, some who maybe want to make this agreement with Moscow or that agreement with Moscow, or in the Irish model, you had the Irish War of Independence from Great Britain, and then they turned on one another, and so there's that. There are all sorts of war is a very fickle mistress, and this country is also deeply traumatized from centuries of occupation by Moscow, and also their tragic history. I mean, this is a part of the world that is soaked in blood going back centuries, because empires have crossed through here trying to basically get at one another. I mean, in the last century, in the 20th century alone, they had two wars of independence that they tried to fight. One when the Bolshevik Revolution happened and Moscow retreated from Ukraine, but then came back. They had a war of independence in 1919 and 1921 that they lost. Then, while they were a member of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin conducted a man-made famine. I know that's controversial to some people, but I have spoken to every family here in Ukraine has a story about what was called the Holodomor. And it was a forced famine, and it has been recognized as a genocide. They lost 7 million people by some estimates to famine, to starvation, to willful starvation. The Bolsheviks would come and they would take the food from basically these farmers who were starving, and they would, take it to other parts of the Soviet Union. So there was that trauma. And then there was the trauma of the Second World War. We like to think that the Eastern Campaign, that Operation Barbarossa, was fixated on Russian territory. And indeed, the first year of that campaign was a push towards Moscow that failed. And of course, there was the encirclement and besieging of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. But so much of the fighting was here. And it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. So they went through that trauma. Then they go through the trauma of the terror of living under Soviet rule, which was constantly trying to repress all Ukrainian cultural identity. And we're all in one Soviet now. There is no such thing as a Ukraine. There is only, bigger Russians, smaller Russians, but they like to call Ukraine. So this country has been deeply, deeply traumatized, and it doesn't. I don't excuse Ukrainian corruption simply on Moscow, because you can't say at the same time that Ukraine must have agency and then absolve them of their own corruption issues. But much of the corruption in this country is because that's how things were run from Moscow, and that they're going to have to deal with that. That is going to be a huge, huge problem after this. Well, it's a huge problem right now. So that many people here in Ukraine say we're actually fighting two wars. We're fighting the Russians and we're fighting our own internal corruption. So that on two fronts.
But let me ask you briefly on that point, Phil. When you say they're fighting their own corruption, it's the corruption, I suspect, that is the foundation for some of the opposition that has emerged in the U.S. now for continued support of Ukraine, right? I mean, there's a whole political movement, if you will, that goes along the lines of, listen, we've spent billions of dollars already on Ukraine, and some of it has gone to what is a corrupt state. So how does this corruption manifest itself in Ukraine? And does that mean that American opposition, those who are opposed to continued aid because of the corruption, are they right?
Well, they are right that there is a lot of corruption here. You cannot stick your head in the sand or wear rose-colored glasses. Corruption is not only is it present here, it is omnipresent. It is the way things are run. It is the waters in which people swim. They're trying to change that. They have been trying to change that since 2014 and since they broke away from Moscow, because again, without absolving them of their own agency, the way Moscow runs things internally within the Russian Federation itself, but also in its colonies, is that all things are binary and all things lead to Moscow. And if you have to, and the way that is done is oftentimes by greasing the wheels as that flow of resources and wealth goes to Moscow. And this country has existed that way during its entire occupation by Moscow.
Yeah, but Phil, I guess what I'm getting at here, though, is, and I wasn't originally going to go down this road, but since we're talking about corruption there, uh, is it your suspicion, or maybe there's even evidence, that a substantial amount of the American aid, Western aid, financial aid I'm talking about now, that has gone to Ukraine, has a lot of that been squandered because of corruption?
A percentage of it, absolutely, 100%, yes. But it must be said that the bulk, the vast bulk, I think it's 80 some odd percent of the aid that is sent by the United States is not money. We are not putting pallets of of shrink wrapped dollars, and shipping it over to Ukraine. Some of it is money, absolutely, to pay for pensions, to pay for firefighters or civil society. Yes, there is a cash flow, but the vast majority of the aid that the United States is sending is not money, it is material. And that means the money is going to Northrop Grumman. That means it's going to Raytheon. That means it's going to Lockheed Martin. That's where the money goes. And then Lockheed Martin or whomever will send a tank or a Bradley or artillery shell. And so a lot of that is going directly to the front line. That is in the war fighting machine. That's what it's there for. And it cannot be, there is no black market of them taking artillery shells and sending it somewhere else. These people are fighting for their very existence. If it was ever found out, if it was ever discovered that somebody in the supply chain was taking Bradley fighting vehicles and selling them to Romania or whatever, selling them on the black market, that person or that organization would be pilloried by the Ukrainians themselves. These are their brothers, their sons, their fathers who are out there fighting on the front line. And if it was ever discovered that any weaponry or material was being diverted and put into the back pockets of people, there would be hell to pay. As it stands now, even skimming off the side on not weaponry, but other peripheral things like maybe uniforms or MREs or something like that, there have been occasions where those things have been put out onto the international black market, and people have and the anti-corruption squads that exist here in Ukraine have come down on them like a ton of bricks. But having said that, the corruption is enormous here. It does not, I disagree with the argument that is being made by certain sectors in Washington saying that we're just throwing money into a pit. That is not true. There is corruption. Some money is being misused. It is being combated here as best they can, given the circumstances. But I have no doubt in my I know there's almost weekly there are cases of people being caught and thrown in jail. So it is a problem. But again, to reiterate, most of it is not money that we're sending. We're sending our old warfighting kit. But we then, and we pay our military industrial complex to then replace them with new stuff.
Right. Point well taken. President Trump consistently insists that for this war to end, both sides have to give up something. That is, as he has put it, part of any negotiation of a deal. Is he right about that? And if he is, Phil, what does Moscow give up, and what does Ukraine give up?
Well, I have heard there is a rather strong vocal percentage of people here who say that giving up those oblasts, which are just states or provinces in the east that had been occupied since 2014, they had been basically lost. You've got an entire generation that has grown up only knowing Russian occupation. And they do have a very different, there's a distinct difference of those provinces, those oblasts, than the rest of Ukraine. And Crimea is going to be a problem. Donetsk and Lugansk, I could see the Ukrainians saying, you can have it. Not with a smile on their face. They would like to see it returned, but and people who live there who are currently internally displaced, they'd like to go home.
But
So
let
that
me interrupt for a second here. When you say you can see the Ukrainians saying, "Okay, you can have it," by that do you mean that they're saying, "Okay, we recognize," to Russia, they're saying this, that you now control it and you're entitled to it and it's yours, so good luck to you? Or do you mean that they just accept the reality that Russia is a stronger country, that Russia is already there, and that it just makes sense to recognize the Russian rule over that area, even though they may not technically agree that Russia is entitled to it. Is that the distinction that's being made?
I think they would give lip service to saying we would like to negotiate a return of those oblasts, but ultimately, ultimately, I think the larger percentage of the population here in Ukraine would say, for the sake of peace and ending the death and destruction, we will, in essence, surrender those territories to Moscow's dominion. Moscow's.
That and do you think Moscow would be satisfied with that?
No, no, no. This is the worst defeat for Russia probably in its history. This is worse than the Russo-Japanese War. This is worse than the terrible performance of World War One, which ended the Romanov dynasty. I don't know how far back you'd have to go to look at a defeat of this caliber, of this scale for Moscow. It's been so no, they would not be satisfied. They would not be satisfied with just Donetsk and Luhansk. They will still want that land bridge to support Crimea, hoping that they can return their Black Sea fleet to the home port in Sevastopol, where they have so much infrastructure. They can still use Sevastopol for their submarine fleet, but their surface fleet, as long as Odessa is Ukrainian, will never be safe in Sevastopol. But nevertheless, they have all other sorts of aspirations and hopes for the Crimean Peninsula. So the Russians will want to keep Crimea. They will want to keep Luhansk and the little section of Kherson that connects to Crimea, and they will want Donetsk. They currently own a good chunk of both of those oblasts, not the entire thing. They most likely, and we've already heard them saying this, that they will want even territory that they have not taken. So it would be like saying, I've taken San Diego, so give me California.
Yeah, right.
There are two other oblasts, which they have they held fake referendum, referendum at the end of a gun. And they claim these two other oblasts called what in the South Kherson, and then as I mentioned earlier, Zaporizhia, and those are oblasts that do border on the river. So Moscow may dig in its heels and say, no, those are ours, even though they haven't militarily taken them. We want Kiev to cede that territory to us, even though we haven't fought for it. That's going to be a very difficult thing for Kiev to accept for a lot of different reasons, not least of which because the Russian military has not won those oblasts. They barely, made incursions into those areas. And it would strategically put the Russians in a very good place to come back in 2, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever. So Moscow would like Moscow would like everything east of the river. And I don't know. I don't think Kiev is going to accept those two other oblasts that I mentioned that would put Russia on the river.
Are you,
But
I'm curious about something, Phil. I'm curious about how Ukrainians who you interact with on a daily basis, how they feel now toward Donald Trump. Do they feel that he sold them out? Are they puzzled when you have Western leaders who, as you know, flocked just the other day to Washington and emerged from that White House meeting, all sort of indicating they thought progress is being made, and all of them sort of, saying nice things both to Donald Trump's face and even when they left the White House, not to his face. Do Ukrainians look at that with bewilderment, and did they think, "What the hell is going on there?"
Oh, they follow our politics, you know, meticulously. They know exactly what's going on.
So what do they make?
Well, I mean, nobody is surprised. First and foremost, well, I mean, nine out of 10 Ukrainians, I'm sure, if they were polled, would be like, I mean, nothing that Trump does surprises us because we have no expectations. We have no, we know what the deal is. We know he's friendly with Putin. We know that he doesn't like Zelensky. We know that he looks on Ukraine as a satellite state of Moscow, and he would sell us down the river, at the drop of a hat. So they're not surprised at all. Some are. Alaska made a lot of people like the Oval, the performance in the Oval in the prior visit by Volodymyr Zelensky infuriated Ukraine. I mean, Zelensky's points went up. I think 9 or 10 points. His approval went up because he may be our clown. He may be a clown, but he's our clown, sort of thing. We can criticize our president, but don't you dare do it. And they found that Oval performance with J.D. Vance and Trump, where you don't hold any of the cards. You don't hold any of the cards. That infuriated them. They have been frustrated with American policy all throughout this thing. During the Biden administration, they were hypercritical of the kind of drip, drip, drip. Oh, we'll give you long distance artillery, but we're not sure really. We don't want to anger the Russians. We don't want this thing going nuclear, because the Russians would, every time America would do something, they'd rattle their nuclear saber. And the Biden administration was far more trepidatious of that. So they've had their criticisms of the United States for a long time, but they have absolutely no expectations from Trump. Nobody trusts Trump. Nobody believes in Trump. They're also very well aware of his affinity for Putin. They're also very well aware that the Epstein scandal, that the Epstein thing, that a widespread opinion here was Alaska happened to try and divert from Epstein. They're very, very savvy about Washington politics. So but to just round out with that, and the last thing on that is that the Alaska arrival and the Putin being kind of welcomed back, kind of by Eric Show, and it is on a record. And this is a guy, and I get a little bit worked up about this, because this is a guy who murders old women and children in their sleep, purposely hunts down civilians, time and time again. He is attacking civilians in Ukraine, and he is killing at a huge scale, and he is causing so much pain and suffering here. He has kidnapped tens of thousands of children and basically put them up for auction, internet auction. Russia has an internet online site where you can search for what they call orphans of the war. You can put in what age you'd like, what hair color you like. It's like putting somebody on the block. It's like putting these children up for auction, and they want their kids back. This is a war crime, and to have that man standing on the red carpet next to the president of the leader of the free world, was deeply wounding and insulting to many Ukrainians. So they have no expectations of Donald Trump being in their corner, as it were. If they can get him to be transactional, great.
Right.
I think this last meeting with all the European leaders being there, that was something that the Ukrainians looked on favorably. but they have stopped looking to the White House. We are no longer. And then sadly, I could say this about many Europeans as well. Many European states. I've lived in Europe for 25 plus years. America is not, people don't look to America for leadership anymore. That ship has sailed.
Yeah, which is I think very sad. I suspect you're correct, but also very very sad. I'm on that note, though, Phil. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us on SOS America. Phil Ittner, who has been, as I said at the outset of this episode, has really lived through most of this war since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. And Phil, stay safe there in Ukraine, and I hope we can uh, continue this discussion at another time. Um, and for those of you who are watching or listening to SOS America, as always, we welcome your comments. If you want, of course, subscribe, it's free. And until the next episode of SOS America, I'm Charles Feldman. Thank you very much.